Hello and welcome to my Module 4 reflection video. The first kind of content that we went over was Chapter 9 of the Sphinx in the City, which talks about urban life, the control and disorder and women, and this chapter was called Beyond Good and Evil. Within this text it says, quote, Manhattan becomes a state of mind, a state of insanity. It reveals postmodernism as late romantic sensibility, in which loss of control is pleasurable as well as frightening, and sensation is valued more highly than sense. This quote kind of reminded me of prior readings in Module 3, which had talked on George Simel's seminal 1903 essay, and then the City versus Country Life. Kind of within these, we discussed the differences in like potential like brain development or just kind of how your focuses change based off of your upbringing, which made me wonder if like those who were raised in the cities were like more cold-hearted and technical because they had to adjust to the stimulation. But this text kind of connects to it as it touches on like the loss of control from a fast-paced lifestyle and kind of the focus on short-term sensation and experience that is seen within New York City. And then kind of this article just overall touches on the focus on morals becoming more foggy and them being replaced by aesthetics for women within the city, and kind of how the system that was created that they were placed into kind of strips them of their power. And then later on, the text kind of explains, quote, in three major spheres, changes are occurring which have implications for the future of cities. These three areas are our relationship to nature, the evolution of the family, and the wider economic and political sphere. This quote interested me as I feel like all of these are kind of broad in general, but cover the concerns of our future cities well, and do touch on the content that we have discussed within this course, with talks on our connection with nature, kind of as we discussed urban sprawl and its impacts, and then like public transportation and its benefits for our environment, and then finally the integration of green spaces into our modern cities. And then it also talks on the evolution of family, as we've kind of talked about that shift in families and birth rates, which was recently touched on by the demographic transition model last module. And then it also talks on the economic and political spheres, which have been kind of a primary discussion throughout the course, which the impact of economies and the role that politics played in city development, and then also that development fragmentation that can be seen in redlining and other concepts similar to that. The next one is Chapter 2, the changing of economic context of cities. Within this section, they discuss Keynesianism. It explains, in the United States after the Second World War, the economy was greatly stimulated by government spending on the interstate and the intra-urban highway systems. These new roads enabled unprecedented numbers of households to decentralize out of inner-city areas into surrounding low-density suburban areas. This resulted in greater distances between home, work, and shops, and therefore greatly boosted the automobile industry. This kind of prompted me to debate on the potential for future cities tied to economic growth and prosperity. Just essentially like if the primary profit is collected through that outward expansion, and that profit's generated through like highways to cars to homes and those products for those, is the incentive to expand within those cities or expand more non-profitable systems such as public transportation? Are these essentially like kind of diminished? And I think it also brings up a crucial idea in the role of greed or success within kind of modern or future city building, and how we can kind of integrate both sustainable and practical expansion that might not be profitable alongside projects that do provide substantial profit. And then it also, the models and diagrams within this reading kind of interested me as they connected to our prior readings and add another layer of understanding when connected with the text. The next kind of material was Chapter 3, National Economy, World Economy, and Megatrends. The beginning of this text kind of talks about the necessary shift from a domestic to a global economy for the U.S., and it not only interests me as it's kind of relevant to our current administration, in which the president is kind of seeking to optimize domestic production and avoid some reliance on outside countries for resource supply, but it also prompted me to draw a connection between cities in the same model of U.S. growth, as I feel like other countries such as like China optimize their transportation through creation of speed rails and optimization of electric vehicles, while some major cities such as like Arlington, Texas, still remain without that public transportation infrastructure. And it kind of prompts a question of when will we, as a U.S., stop living in a kind of like our production glory days and kind of understand collaboration and modeling with other cities may benefit our cities. And then also the text states, production sharing, as Peter Drucker said, will be the prevailing form of worldwide economic integration. And this section kind of talks on the division of labor or stages in the production that goes into various products, from, I think it talked about calculators to like hotel room modules. And I felt this also connected to the reason that like cities are able to flourish both culturally and economically at the rate they do, which is due to that like diverse and substantial population that mesh and collaborate within it. And then next video was, can the economy grow forever? Throughout this, I was constantly reminded of the demographic or epidemiological transition models videos that we reviewed last module, and kind of talking about that increasing efficiency with lower materials, and the improvement of technology was mentioned. And this reminded me of the fifth stage within the epidemiological transition model, in which the advancements in tech and medicine that worked prior no longer worked or were effective as the disease adapted. And it kind of prompted me to wonder if there's a connection with that resource levels and the disease adaptation, and if at some point that technological advancements that they kind of said that we could like utilize to optimize resources with using less wouldn't suffice at a certain point in economic growth. The next video was, America's cities have always been changing and COVID took them to a new direction. The trends discussed in this video reminded me of the trends of white flight that we had previously talked about, with the option of working remotely and shifting to a less populated suburban area, replicating that movement of white families out of those inner city neighborhoods. It kind of poses a question on the impact this will have on cities, as kind of when that white flight occurred, predominantly Black and minority neighborhoods were both neglected and then declined over time. The next one was the real estate answering the U.S. housing crisis questions. I was really excited to see this, the Wired Tech Support kind of video, because I do enjoy watching these to kind of educate and learn about topics that I don't really know too much about. And it reminded me of the Module 3 article that talked on the suburbanization of U.S. in 1945. And this I kind of talked on the housing market manipulation by that government. And the questions I had during that reading were kind of revisited watching this, wondering what national and local governments could do to combat the current housing crisis. The next video was the lessons from research, which was the Stanford Graduate School business. I like the part from Dr. Megan Ryerson, where she talks on air transportation and urban transportation safety. Interested me because it kind of touched on ideas that I didn't think of prior, and her talks on like the slot utilization in major airports is really interesting to me, as it kind of connects to future city growth and expansion, and questions as to think if like completion or competition between developers is hindering expansion, and would an incentive system like they have kind of created with the airports, like she described, be useful in future city building. And then the article Shrinking the Economy to Save the World kind of interested me, as it provides a new perspective on the declining birth rates that we had talked about, and shifts that focus from how to counter it through incentives or programs to kind of how to embrace this degrowth and use it to attack those issues that were derived from overpopulation and those concerns that were kind of unaddressable. And then finally, the Allison Sander Megatrends Art of Science and Trend Tracking video was interesting, as it kind of touches on the idea or concept that we've talked about frequently throughout this course, which is these cycles or trends. And it kind of reminds us of the importance in tracking the current and past data trends, and then utilizing these to kind of plan and move forward. And it kind of reminded me of that alternative futures article that we had covered in Module 1, and shows also just kind of like how trends in real life of info like reoccur, that they also reoccur throughout this course, because this idea that we're talking about now was also talked about within Module 1, so kind of displayed what it was talking about, which was interesting. So thank you.